We often call the summer of 1967 the summer of love, right? When there was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. This summer, with the Neptune-Saturn conjunction, I'm calling the summer of fear. Fear and loathing in America. So anyway, we're going to do a few horoscopes for Neptune entering Aries. But first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the transit. So Neptune enters Aries tomorrow, March 30th, right? I'm doing this on the 29th, obviously, for you here. And this is a very important transit because Neptune has a rather long orbital period of about 165 years. So that means the last time that Neptune entered Aries was right around the time of the American Civil War. In fact, Neptune entered Aries just days after the Confederacy's attack on Fort Sumter, which began the war, you see. Now, we typically think of these transits as being more generational for the outer planets, but there are some particularly interesting things going along with this. So, like I said, Neptune's entering Aries tomorrow, but on May 24th, Saturn will also enter Aries, and these two will join each other in a conjunction. And this is very, very important because we see these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions occurring about every 36 years and also heralding very important events in history, in world history, right? The Neptune-Saturn conjunctions sort of bring us a tension between Saturnian reality and realism, objectivity, and Neptunian idealism, fantasy, and sometimes delusion. So we'll see all sorts of different patterns that accompany these things. One big pattern we see is popular uprisings, right? So for example, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that brought in communism occurred under a Neptune-Saturn conjunction, right? Then we had another one in the 1980s, the late 1980s, right? Where the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union ended. And we saw a popular uprising of the various Eastern European nations that were involved in the Soviet bloc. And that's partly what brought down, right? What brought down the Soviet Union. Now, we also see themes of paranoia, right? And restriction. So for example, right, we had the satanic panic of the late 80s that brought in a bunch of paranoia about things that weren't actually happening. They thought there was like ritual child abuse going on, which really isn't true. Although we're seeing all the same stuff come up now. A bunch of conspiracy theories and delusions that eventually become a driving force. For example, we also had one of these around the time of the Salem witch trials and the witch panic of the late 1600s. In fact, in Europe, there were pamphlets about witches and demons. Really, it just reads like QAnon does, you know, which is quite funny. Well, now we're going to see, instead of satanic panic, we're going to see a trance panic. And we can see it developing already. Now, this transit with Neptune conjunct Saturn peaks in 2026, February 2026. But it starts this summer. You know, we often call the summer of 1967 the summer of love, right? When there was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. This summer, with the Neptune-Saturn conjunction, I'm calling the summer of fear. Fear and loathing in America. It'll probably be more than just trans panic. We'll probably, I mean, we already have immigrant panic right now. But the thing about these transits is that they often include imposition of force. Yeah, imposition of force and laws and restriction, the building up of boundaries around whatever the panic is. So we have to be ready for whatever comes. In your own particular life, you want to look at the whole sign house Aries is for you, because that will show you the area of life in which this tension between reality and fantasy is taking place. Idealism is good as long as we We have a bit of sobriety about it. And we don't let the fantasy and intoxication just take over. In fact, intoxication is another theme with Neptune, isn't it? And Saturn. Did I mention it? I don't know. The DARE program, right? It was drug something or other. For those of us who are millennials, we remember say no to drugs, kids. And the ones who participated in it actually ended up doing more drugs, right? I mean, I'm a good example of that. I had fun. A little too much fun. But then we also had prohibition during the Neptune-Saturn conjunction of 1917, 1918. We also saw the rise of the suffragette movement, you see. Now, what's important about this for the United States is it's going to be the 5th house. So we'll see probably some more restrictions of reproductive rights and anything to do with gender and with children and sexuality. So we're probably going to see restrictions on those things as well. Now, we got to get to your horoscopes, but I just want to reemphasize that you need to sort of take a look at what happened while Neptune was touring Pisces in your chart, and what was happening with Saturn touring Pisces, because that started March of 2023. And it'll be very important to recognize the themes behind this transition, because the eclipses are also intimately involved with this, right? We had a lunar eclipse in Pisces last September. Then we had a lunar eclipse in Virgo very recently. And now we're gearing up for the solar eclipse in Virgo after September. But right now is the final solar eclipse in Aries. And it's like Saturn and the North Node are trading places, as I said in my previous video. So you see how all these things are connected. The North Node totally amplified a sector of your life, while the South Node decreased it. You could see that with the Aries Libra eclipses. Now Saturn is going to come into Aries and depress all of that. At the same time, Neptune is coming into Aries and confusing all of that. You got to keep your wits about you. You got to have a sober view towards yourself and your circumstance. But that doesn't mean we lose our Neptunian hope, right? It was Neptunian hope, right, under one of these conjunctions that brought the Communist Manifesto, that brought revolutions, popular uprisings, and people from the working classes reclaiming their rights and their power. So, anyway, let's look at the horoscopes now. Let's look at the horoscopes now for this. Where's the chart here? And we'll start with Aries Rising, you see. I mean, you can look here, right? Neptune tomorrow, 0.0 Aries. Isn't that fun? Or fun Neptunian, lovely. And look, the moon is just here departing the solar eclipse. So it's like, you know, boom, boom, boom. All these big transits happening all around the same time. So Aries Rising, Neptune going into your first house, right? This creates confusion about ourselves. Now, the North Node had been going through your first house, which means the eclipses had as well. You just had the eclipse yesterday on the 29th in your first house. This pumps us up. This gives us confidence. This forces us to look at ourselves. Oftentimes, we have relationships fail, in which case we have to be more independent and find our own self-value from ourselves, which leads to confidence, doesn't it? But then Saturn comes into the first house and depresses everything. So remember, you may have an overinflated sense of self-importance from Neptune, but Saturn does the opposite. She takes you down a peg, right? She's going to test how well your confidence really panned out, how much faith you really have in yourself. And these tests and trials are necessary because you have to prove yourself in the crucible of life, don't you? Now let's move on to Taurus Rising. Our Taurus Rising homies. Excuse me. So this means Neptune is entering your 12th house. The North Node, having gone through there, probably increased your sense of mental health crisis, or uh, not disease, but dis-ease, right? That feeling of being overwhelmed, perhaps, which would have started around April of 2023, of needing to retreat from life and perhaps cultivate a sense of self-seclusion. I call this, like, the cocoon phase, where we have to retreat into ourselves, right? But at the same time, it can be very healing. We may have to address self-destructive behavior. But Saturn coming in later in May is going to make you feel isolated, reclusive, exiled, like you're forced out of public life or any sort of connection. But you see, this is important because she's testing you on your ability to be self-aware, right? To be self-aware and to learn self-discipline. Now the North Node going into Pisces, well, we talked about that in our previous video. So just watch my previous video for more stuff on the eclipses, right? And Saturn passing through houses. But so that's very important. Remember, in the larger context, Neptune going through your 12th house is going to force you to look at all these things. Now, you may also find yourself getting more involved in religious or spiritual pursuits. That may be a defining thing over this time. But let's move on to Gemini Rising. So for our Gemini Rising friends, that means Neptune is entering the 11th house. That's where my natal Neptune is. And this can make us very idealistic. But in terms of what's possible for groups of people, it brings optimism. Working with like-minded people and like-minded groups. We see people who hold a vision out for society and for humanity, who cultivate a vision and try to propagate that or disseminate that through group work and group activities, right? So this is a very important thing. Now, when Saturn goes in here, Saturn's going to make us feel, or make you feel, Gemini Rising, make you feel like you're cut off from your communities, make you feel like you're cut off from like-minded people. So that's the time where you sort of have to really cultivate that optimism. And you'll find yourself bouncing back and forth between the sense of, hey, I've got to work on behalf of oppressed people or something like that, a bigger vision, a bigger view. But Saturn comes in there and makes you feel all alone, makes you feel cynical, makes you feel like, why am I even trying? What am I doing this for? So that's where you're going to see the tension. And you have to really cultivate that sense of hope and necessity and your values. It's not always about making things successful right away. Sometimes we expect everything just to work out. But oftentimes it's a lot more complicated and challenging. And we have to oscillate between these two visions. So yeah, hold out a vision for the future. But remember, just like Alcoholics Anonymous, you take it one step at a time. And it's about manifesting these things in material reality that matters. But let's move on to Cancer Rising, or Cancer Rising friends. So Neptune's entering the 10th house. Anyway, Neptune coming into the 10th house can bring us optimism about our life direction and our life path. But Saturn coming in creates a tension here, you see, after, the end of May. And that tension will feel like we're missing opportunities and our life direction has sort of hit a brick wall. However, Neptune there brings us new opportunities. The difficulty, though, is remaining objective and sober about these opportunities. Some of them can be completely deceptive or false or not even a real opportunity at all. Like you go to apply for a job and then you go for the interview and it's like the place isn't even there, right? Or it's like someone's, treehouse or something. I don't know. but there's something deceptive about it that doesn't work out. Now, you want to use that Neptunian idealism to trudge through perceived obstacles. But as I've said before, you still have to maintain that sense of realism, because if a certain path isn't yielding the results you need, then you got to move on, right? You got to move on. The North Node going through Aries probably brought you a sense of, new life direction, of change, changing a career, changing what, perhaps what you want to do, your vocation in life. What is, what people know you for. But then Saturn comes in and challenges all that and says, well, we're going to make you feel stifled and stagnant and see what you do with that. Yeah. Oftentimes, when we've already had a big life change in terms of direction and career, we have to trudge through it. And like I said, prove ourselves that we can meet the challenge. But let's move on to Leo Rising. So for Leo Rising, friends, Neptune's going into the 9th house. The North Node had been going through the 9th house, which, is necessarily brought reorientation in your beliefs. Oftentimes, we find a new way of thinking, new beliefs, a new spiritual path, new political values, something like that. Now, Neptune coming in amplifies the sort of idealism around that, but Neptune can also bring the deception and intoxication of those things. We can get overly zealous or enthusiastic, to put it a bit more nicely, about our chosen spirituality or what we believe. We might find ourselves being fanatical about something that we believe, but essentially won't be serving us. We see conflicts around all these things because Saturn will enter in after May and challenge what you've believed, deconstruct your beliefs, restrict your travel sometimes. It can even bring a partner from a foreign country or create problems with a partner from a foreign country or foreign language or culture or whatever. But the key thing about this is about the tension between what you've traditionally believed and new beliefs that are coming up. You're going to find that it's hard to let go of legacy values that don't serve you anymore. But you'll also find that you're more and more attracted to new modes of thought. Saturn coming in, though, will test your thinking, your sense of meaning, and your sense of value. So be prepared to let things go. Don't hold on to beliefs and try not to be too zealous or enthusiastic, because whatever you believe right now is wrong. It is wrong because we always learn more and we always understand more bit by bit. So you can't be right until you're wrong. And you never really are right. You're only more right and less wrong over time as you progress. So anyway, let's move on to Virgo Rising, or Virgo Rising homies. So for Virgo Rising, Neptune is entering the 8th house of death, debt, taxes, other people's money, right? Investments, gifts, all that sort of fun stuff. We also see fear, criminal stuff, criminal enterprises, and trauma, and also letting things go and forgiveness. So Neptune entering in encourages us to let things go. Now, sometimes Neptune can bring an overestimation of our finances. It can make us a little over enthusiastic or over optimistic, like I said, and sometimes we spend money a little too liberally. Like Neptune has been going through my 2nd house for years and years, and I haven't been the most judicious with my funds, but I've been learning to be more so. The North Node, having moved through the 8th house, could have brought an end to, well, it could have brought more debt to you. It could have brought a death of someone close to you. And it could have brought losses or gains. Sometimes we see gains come from the eclipses being in our 8th house. We'll get a tax refund. We'll get, more sales or more clients, or investments will pay off. Our 401k gets more money, retirement plans, or whatever. But this is definitely a time to maintain a sense of hope about that. But when Saturn enters in after May, Saturn sometimes can bring actual losses, monetary losses, a death, right? Someone in that who's close to us. So you want to prepare for all these things. Now, the death thing is probably the most extreme permutation, but at the same time, we do see losses. And we do see a need for forgiveness or reconciliation oftentimes too. When I went through this, my ex-wife and I started a joint bank account, which is also very 8th house, sharing things with a partner or sharing things, with other people, joint finances, for example. Now let's move on to Libra Rising. So for our Libra Rising homies, this puts Neptune going into the 7th house of relationships, partnerships, business partnerships, opponents sometimes, right? In conflicts and competitions. Now, Neptune going in here can bring a lot of optimism around relationships and romance. Whether or not we really have a sober view of it. Neptune comes in and makes us feel really romantic. Like, oh, how romantic. That's so wonderful. Yes, yes, yes. And we really have to be careful. Because sometimes when we have rose-colored glasses like Neptune gives us, then we don't recognize when people are treating us like garbage. And relationships are never quite fulfilling until we're willing to walk away. Because when we're too scared to leave, then we allow ourselves to be treated like trash, don't we? Because when Saturn enters in here, Saturn brings that sense of realism. It can either cause a strain between partners or a deepening of commitments. So there's going to be this oscillation that happens between the sense of romance, of Romeo and Juliet. Wherefore art thou, Romeo? Or remember when he says, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Rise, O sun, and kill the envious moon, and yada. I forget it after that, but you feel me? It's this this tension between the need for commitment and a real foundation of relationship, rather than just all the lovey-dovey butterflies in the in the solar plexus type thing. I call butterflies butterlies, because they usually are harbingers of codependency. It's so funny because when we think of Libra Rising, don't we think of relationships, I mean, we think of, it's a Venus-ruled sign. And then Venus is in Pisces, her sign of exaltation. It's so dreamy, so dreamy. But remember, we're being called here to balance the realism with the sense of idealism. The North Node, having gone through the 7th house, either brought big breakups or big beginnings in relationships. Perhaps we saw a rivalry start up, like a significant rivalry. And then Saturn will go through and make that persist for a while until there's a sense of reconciliation eventually in the 8th house. But remember, whatever that sense of abundance was that came from the eclipses in your 7th house, Saturn's going to come through and sit on them. So just be mentally prepared, right? Doesn't mean you sit there and worry, because that won't help you. But it does mean that you have to be self-aware and you have to weigh your actions in terms of your goals. Is this going to hurt what I want? But now let's move on to Scorpio Rising. So for Scorpio Rising, Neptune's moving into the 6th house, which can bring a lot of idealism around health, work, and responsibilities, right? It can make us feel a bit like a martyr, that we do so much for everyone, that we're sacrificing ourselves, that we're so good to everyone. So, oftentimes we do people-pleasing stuff, or we get sort of emotionally manipulative of people because we can be like, oh, I did so much for you and you don't do anything in return. But Saturn entering in sort of forces us to face our responsibilities, to pick up the pieces, right, of things that we've let go by the wayside. So on the one hand, Neptune makes us want to avoid work, while Saturn forces us to do it. So what does that mean for you? It means on the one hand, it's good to have that sense of optimism, that you bring a sense of idealism to your workplace, you bring a new vision, and that you get quite optimistic about your physical health, right? That you start new routines, that you begin to attend to illnesses, injuries, chronic conditions, and also to have harmony with coworkers. Well, to reconcile conflicts with coworkers as well. Before we move on, the North Node moving through your 6th house probably brought new routines with health. It probably brought a sense of getting your stuff together, taking responsibility. But then, as I said earlier, Saturn coming in really tests you on that. And you'll feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and you'll have to take time for yourself to find rest, to work on nutrition, and enjoy yourself. I usually say the 3-legged stool of the 6th house is nutrition, sleep, and exercise. So those are things you're going to have to attend to. But let's move on to Sagittarius Rising. Snajimattarius Rising. So anyway, this means Neptune's entering your 5th house. So now the 5th house is children, sex, pleasure, romance, the things we do for fun. It can also be like I said, the things we do for fun. It can be sports. It can be gambling, games of various types, art, music, creative expression. So when Neptune enters in here, sometimes we find ourselves inspired to create things. Sometimes kids, but a lot of times it's art, music, poetry. We get a sense of beauty through creation, right? Beauty through words, through painting, through drawing, through playing some... I play guitar, obviously, you see that. But then Saturn entering the 5th house and conjoining there creates a tension between that sort of inspiration and that sense of, you don't have time for this. You don't have time for fun, right? You got to get to work. And a lot of times there's a lot of stress with Saturn in the 5th house because it feels like you can't enjoy yourself. And every time you try to, you get sucked back in to putting out small fires all over the place. That's why it's stressful. All kinds of little events and issues keep popping up. If you have kids, then they'll have persistent issues too over a 2-year period. And that will exhaust you and drain your energy. So you have to find a balance between the sense of needing to have fun, right? You got to watch out for the intoxication fun though, because Neptune in the 5th house can encourage us to, go a little far with the pleasures like, drinking and smoking and all the other things. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about. So there's got to be a resolution or a balancing of these tensions between handling things and being no nonsense, and then being inspired, being dreamy, and being creative, you see. The North Node going through your 5th house Well, sometimes it actually brings kids and gets us pregnant, but other times we feel like we can have fun again. We get brought back out into the light of day. We feel like we're connecting with people and enjoying ourselves after, you know, a period of maybe a little depression. And now Saturn is coming in, and Saturn's going to test how well we're still able to enjoy ourselves. So make sure you want to have that attitude. Very characteristic of Saturn and Neptune in the 5th house. We're going to have fun, damn it, whether we like it or not. Yeah. But let's move on to Capricorn Rising. For our Capricorn Rising friends, Neptune is entering the 4th house, which is an angular house. It's a very powerful place. Well, it's the 4th powerful place after the 1st, the 10th, the 7th, and the 4th, in that order. So with Neptune entering the 4th house, it often brings a sense of patriotism or homeland or pride about your nationality or your ethnic background or your history or genealogy or family. That's a frequent thing. Like I said, in the case of the United States, which is, that was Sagittarius rising, but still, Saturn was going through the 4th house. And you saw this resurgence of, oh gosh, this is the slogan, Make America Great Again, right? I mean, that is very Saturn in the 4th house. It's like this fantasy imposition of a history that never existed. But anyway, so we have to work on this tension as Capricorn risings, right? Your fellow Saturn girls like me, Capricorn and Aquarius rising, are the Saturn girls. So the Capricorn rising bit, right, for you, means that you have to sort of balance this tension between a sense of pride, perhaps, and a sense of reality. You know, when I think of Neptune in the 4th house, I think of, colonialism type stuff. I think of people, trying to impose their beliefs on other people out of a misplaced sense of optimism and fanaticism. Meanwhile, Saturn going through there tells us, like, this is not your place, right? It makes us feel sort of alien in our own area. And it often makes us retreat. So, with the North Node going through the 4th house, you probably had a significant move or change with your parents. Saturn coming in there, though, will stifle whatever happened with that. Either you're going to have issues with your home or your home life, things break, you have additional taxes, mortgage fees, whatever, your rent goes up, all these sorts of things that make our private life quite difficult. So just be aware of that for Capricorn risings. Now let's move on to Aquarius rising. This is me. Yay, Aquarius rising. So that means Neptune's going into our 3rd house. I think I mentioned this earlier, right? It's optimism about ideas, about our voice, our communication, the way we express in the world, right? It's disseminating a sense of inspiration through speech. And I'm planning on, testifying at committee hearings and various things locally about political issues that matter to me and matter to my community. When the North Node was going through the 3rd house, it felt like our voices were amplified, perhaps. But see, Saturn coming in to conjoin Neptune will feel like our voices are being stifled. So it's like we're going to have this tension between speaking inspirational words and, on the other hand, speaking melancholic words, overly realistic or harsh words. For example, I've been having a tendency towards doomerism and, communicating the doom and gloom stuff that might be coming up. There will have to be a balancing of those tensions between the doomerism, the doom and gloom reality, of course, about our situation, and the Neptunian inspiration and hope about it. And in balancing the two, our goal should be inspiring people while also giving them a sense of reality about the situation. I'm sort of thinking about, Malcolm X. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us, right? I think maybe I was too loud there. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff we're going to be facing. Let's move on now to Pisces Rising, our final sign. For Pisces Rising, Neptune will be entering the second house. This is where I just departed from, right? My Neptune is leaving my second house and going into my third. What Neptune in the second house does is brings us a little over optimism about our material resources. It can make us, tossing money around, giving people money, lending people money. And I think of this as someone who tends to pay the bills at restaurants for their friend. Oh no, I got it. Let me help you out. There's a sense of generosity almost to our detriment. Now, with Saturn entering in, you're going to feel restriction around your finances. You'll feel a need to be more frugal. You'll feel a need to budget yourself, hopefully. So there's going to be a sense of tension between wanting to be helpful and wanting to be generous. And on the other hand, needing to conserve, needing to manage your resources and budget yourself. And in resolving that tension will come the ability to put your resources where it matters, to use your sense of value to judge objectively where your resources are best used, where your help is best used, where you can be of the most service, and not just spin your wheels and spend all your energy trying to force yourself into situations you don't belong in. So anyway, the North Node moving through the second house may have brought windfalls of money. Saturn entering into the second house, though, is going to test all that. It's going to make you feel a sense of loss, a sense of lack and scarcity. And that sense is going to need to be balanced with your need for generosity. Being judicious about where to put your energy and resources. So that's up to you to be self-aware and see where your time and energy are best used. But anyway, that was the final sign. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful for you. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. And make sure to click the bell when you subscribe so that you get notified when my new videos drop. And I do the best readings. It's science. You can book through my website, saturngirl.org. And if you can't afford a reading right now, come to my live streams and get one for free. But you have to be subscribed to get notified about them. And please consider tipping me. It helps me make such wonderful content. You can give through super thanks below or become a member of my channel. And remember, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful whatever it is you're having.